A warm welcome to our listeners. This is SciLang Global Podcast, where polyglots from around the world help us unravel the relationship between languages, science, and ourselves. My name is Agnieszka, and today I have the pleasure of hosting our guest, Jared Gimbel. Jared is a hyperpolyglot, a language teacher, a programmer, and a game designer. So grab something nice to drink and let's begin. Hello, Jared.
Hello, Agnieszka.
Thank you so much for joining us today. So can you please tell us, as a warm-up question, what languages you speak?
Okay, so when I joined the International Hyperpolyglot Society 4 years ago, I had to be tested in 12 languages. And by test, I mean a fairly light process in which I was asked to record a video of myself for 1 minute per language, and then that video had to be vetted by a native or a fluent speaker, and then as a result, qualified.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, there were some languages very much like friendships that left, and then others that came in. But
Mm-hmm.
the current lineup that I do have is English, my native language, Yiddish, the first language I actually became fluent in as an adult, which I started learning 15 years ago. The Scandinavian languages, Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian, even though I do mostly focus on Swedish for heritage reasons. Hungarian through my father's side, as he is Hungarian Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
Hebrew, even though I do mostly focus on the biblical variety due to my upbringing. Slovak, Finnish, Spanish, German, and Scottish Gaelic. And on top of that, I have studied two minor degrees, around 40 other languages. I somewhat jokingly refer to it as having dated them for a little bit. And as a result, many different pieces of their grammar and their basic vocabulary, they turn out to be quite useful, especially in New York City, where I live, where you literally have the United Nations, and of course the United Nations in miniature at every single subway stop.
Mm. So it's definitely useful in every corner of the New York City.
Oh, definitely. The truth be told is that I think that speaking even a few words of a foreign language can turn out to be a magic spell, like a charm spell, where if you cast it on someone, then you're in their good graces almost immediately.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I absolutely love your comparison,
Thank you.
languages to genuine magic. I totally agree with that. Especially you, right before we started, you actually said something to me in Polish, and I already, it was like I kind of could feel myself, lighting up. It's just such a nice thing,
Oh, yeah.
even if it's a little thing, right? Um,
Oczywiście.
and so I feel like there's a lot to kind of grasp here, especially that the amount of languages that you speak is just phenomenal. And I really like the way you said about these 40 languages that you kind of dated, because this is definitely a question that I wanted to ask you, like whether you see, that I think that's the problem, because I think what I wanted to ask you, whether you kind of failed to learn any language, but I don't. Now when you said dated, it's such a nicer way to put it. But I'm kind of curious about the relationship with these languages. So was there any specific reason why you stick to some languages and you didn't with some others?
If I were to try to make someone a hyperpolyglot, the one piece of advice I would give them is, like, in a sense, to have a hook. And I keep in mind a story from my Jewish upbringing where there's a kid who's learning how to read the Hebrew alphabet, and then the rabbi, he presents him a text with the various Hebrew letters, and that they're all coated with honey. And then when he does
Mm,
read the letters out loud, the kid gets to lick the honey. And exactly why I stuck with some languages rather than other had to do with the various flavors of honey. And
Mm,
so sometimes this had to do with friendships, sometimes this had to do with business opportunities, and other times it had to do with travel in a sense. But the fact is that sometimes, because I remember my favorite foods, they usually change depending on the location or my age or certain stages in my life. And so as a result, the various honeys of the languages, they serve to be the primary motivation. And the fact is that if I had infinite time, the fact is that I would be doing like 50 plus languages and things of that
mhm,
nature. But right now, obviously, given that I don't have that, I do have to primarily focus a lot on my favorites. And
mhm,
in a sense, I also tend to think of language learning as a huge, big infinity of unknowns, very much like science. And
mhm,
definitely one thing that happens in the C2 level is that you stop trying to increase your vocabulary and instead
mhm,
you try to increase your cultural know-how. And so your primary goal doesn't become speaking in a conversation well, but rather, let's say they put you on a trivia show in
mhm,
the country where your target language is spoken. How well would you do? How does your cultural know-how measure up?
mhm, mhm, mhm. When it comes to this cultural thing, do you feel like this is something that you actually get later with the language learning, or you kind of have to incorporate it faster? Like, what do you think, especially as a language teacher? Is there a way of, well, like, is there a place and time to do it, or you just should do it right away or later?
It's very much dependent on the circumstances. I think that
Mm-hmm.
if you're an expat somewhere, the fact is that you may have that cultural know-how. You may know those karaoke songs, but
Mm-hmm.
you might be speaking at an A1 level. And then
Mm-hmm.
on the other hand, like I've sometimes encountered people who speak English at a C2 level and they mispronounce the name of certain American states. And so
Oh.
there's that. And so to
Mm-hmm.
what degree you really need it, you don't necessarily need it
Mm-hmm.
for a C2 on paper. You don't really need it for fluency. Now, the fact is, I'm a native English speaker, and thanks largely to my upbringing in an Orthodox Jewish day school, I did not know a lot about American pop culture. Was I
Mm-hmm.
still a native speaker? Am I still a native speaker? Yes. Could I pass that trivia contest I mentioned? No.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a sense, I think it probably depends on your priorities. And the fact is that if you do want to be able to, let's say, understand American television well, then yes, you probably will need that. If you want to understand
Mm-hmm.
stand-up comedy, then you will need that. If you do want to be able to speak to your colleagues about various other niche areas, it depends on the niche area in that respect. So I think that you have to determine a list of priorities. And one thing I've noticed about language learning is that it's a constantly rolling list. It's a constantly rolling to-do list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that you said that it's a, ongoing, like you have to like think about these priorities all the time. And I wonder whether you have any take on the world right now when it comes to priorities. So do you think, like, what do you think languages are kind of for people? So do you think that in the future we will, rely on technology more when it comes to communication, or people will still learn different languages?
Here's what I think. I think that the more you have a streamlined culture,
Mm-hmm.
and one of my friends, Brian Liu, he refers to this as the Starbucksification of the world, then the more then various other foreign languages will offer something alternative and cool. And one thing I
Ah.
really noticed about me learning other languages is that, in a sense, I could get new ways to become humorous. I could get new ways to encounter various problems. And one result of this is that I had huge toolboxes in my closet with each of the various languages and their cultural knowledge, and to some degree their grammatical structures that sometimes I would pull out, and then I would manage to use some of them in my overall creative pursuits in making video games. And like, there's this one point, my first video game, which came out last year, is set in Greenland. But
Mm-hmm.
there are several times in which I did include various Easter eggs, as we call it in the video game industry, that explicitly referenced um, something in Hungarian or something in Yiddish. And obviously, it was
Oh.
usually like a blink and you'll miss it variety of thing. Like, there's this one point in the game where the interface goes crazy and then a bunch of pop ups come up, and
Mm-hmm.
then things like that. Like, obviously, the bread and butter of the game still needed to be Greenland, but sometimes in some of um, the silly bits, I could manage to include pieces of other cultures. And the fact is that the various ways of thinking that I had encountered from my travels, and also from the various musical tracks or TV shows I had picked up from them, even if I don't know the language very well, that served to, it's like adding a new spice to your spice cabinet.
I absolutely love how you put it. I don't think we actually talk enough about using languages in a humorous way, and that you can, have fun with it. And I actually was about to ask you about you being a game designer and how languages could help you in that, but I didn't I don't think I anticipated this answer. But is there anything else that you think of when it comes to languages and game designing?
Hmm. A lot of people do ask me if my games are straight up language learning apps, and the
Hmm.
answer is no. But my games are actually set in real world locations, and in order
Hmm.
to make the location real, you definitely, unless it's set in a very homogenous English speaking country, and I don't really think that those exist, although parts of them may still be homogenous. The fact is that you do need multilingualism for them to be believable. And in a
Hmm.
sense, like the same way that you're a tourist and you walk around, and then you sometimes see things in languages you understand, and that you sometimes see languages and things in languages you don't understand. And that's the same way that I had to build my first game of Caverini Nuke Adventures, which is, I jokingly referred to as like Greenland the game, or something like if a travel guide to Greenland had a baby with Final Fantasy. And in the overworld, I did include, obviously, various signs that had words in Greenlandic or Danish, the same way that I remember encountering when I was in Nuke 7 years ago.
Hmm.
And and so, as a result, I think that knowledge of this sort of stuff can make things more real. I even remember in the Disney movie Ralph Breaks the Internet that I actually caught a Danish signage, believe it or not, in the background when he first encounters the internet, and I had to do a serious double take.
Yeah, that's really cool because it's true that language is such an important thing in the world building, that we didn't really think about. So, and you have to make it right, like you cannot just say, oh, language, whatever, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which language we choose. Um, so do you think that because you have like so many, I'm coming back to it because it's just, it's very impressive that you
Thank
can
you.
speak so many languages, and it just, I wonder whether you had like a specific motivation to I wonder whether for you it was just, oh, I want to learn as many languages as I can, or was there just like it happened because you wanted to learn that language and that language and that language, or was it combined? Did you have like any like what kind of mindset you have to learn so many languages?
I think of it like friendships. There are some people who actually, they say, I want to make as many friends as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and um, what happens is that the same way that you don't become friends with everyone you know for the same reason, it's the
Mm-hmm.
same reason that I don't become friends with all of my various languages for the same reason. And some of those, very much like friendships, happen because of proximity. The fact is just simply because I'm exposed to them on the street or what have you. And there are others of them that I genuinely find that what they offer is something that is genuinely fulfilling in my life. And I do remember in my 20s that I was really very much motivated by a gotta catch 'em all mentality, or at least just
Mm-hmm.
sample them. But right now, sometimes I even describe myself as a recovering hyperpolyglot, in part because I really wanted to focus on some of my favorite languages and,
Mm-hmm.
again, focus more on like the trivia game elements. And by that, I mean like being, if a native speaker mentions something that references a historical event which most native speakers know about,
Mm-hmm.
then I should be able to understand that too. And
Mm-hmm.
various other things as well. And one thing that's particularly noteworthy is when I read Yiddish literature, for example, and that many of these authors, for example, came from Poland or the Russian Empire, and they referenced things that many Americans wouldn't know very much about. And then
Mm-hmm.
on the other hand, you do have, for example, Isaac Bashevis Singer's Enemies, a Love Story, which is actually set in Mermaid Avenue in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, that references my world, even though I don't live in that area of Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, let's say if you were from Poland or what have you, then suddenly Brooklyn becomes foreign. And
Mm-hmm.
then you really, really have that. And so as a result, it genuinely, you require the cultural know how in order to fully understand the work on yet another level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder how do you feel about, because your first language is English,
That's
and
correct.
how do you feel about people not always knowing that much for like about your country or about your language? They just, because let's be honest, English is a language that we use to communicate mostly. So do you have like any do you feel in any specific way that not it's not always true that people who speak English know everything about history of your country?
You do raise a very, very valid point. And in a sense, I think that this somehow ties into a certain perfectionist
Mm-hmm.
mentality that I think tends to grasp certain hyperpolyglot types probably somewhere after 10 years. Like since they really started getting involved into languages, and they somehow think that they're missing something, that like in a sense that they don't know like the full canon of popular songs or movies. And in a sense, some people may need that and others may not. And
Mm-hmm.
I guess it entirely is dependent on personality types. And one thing I always ask my students is like, why do you want this language?
Mm-hmm.
And this also ties into learning programming languages too. Um, and so when I teach, a lot of people say like, I want to learn how to code. Yeah, then what are you going to do with it? And so like if you had a genie who you could ask like, genie, I want my dream program, what program is that? If the
Mm-hmm.
genie were to give you fluency in your target language, then what you would you do with it? Would you be talking with your friends on the street? Would you be listening to all the pop songs on the radio and be able to understand all of them? Both of
Mm-hmm.
those are valid answers. It just depends entirely on what you want. So think
Mm-hmm.
about what you would ask the genie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Coming back kind of to the English, um, do you feel that because people use it, for work, and in academia, for example, it's like you kind of have to use English to communicate your work and new ideas and to collaborate. But do you think it is a restriction, or do you think it's actually a very good thing that, it's something that brings us closer?
The fact is that common languages are nothing new in history.
Mm-hmm.
That, in a sense, if it wouldn't be English, it would be French, it would
Yeah.
be Persian, it would be Greek. The fact
Mm-hmm.
is that these sort of things have existed, and the fact is that
Mm-hmm.
not only that, but in a sense, like in Papua New Guinea, Tok Pisin arose precisely because of that need.
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, I think that it's only a restriction if you want it to be. Like,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense, one thing I've noticed about places that have very high English proficiency is that, in a sense, they also use it to keep people out. And like a lot of people
Oh.
think, oh, I don't need to know that language because everyone speaks English there. This is usually the case of, for example, Northern Europe or the South Pacific. But then the
Mm-hmm.
fact is that once you've actually are capable of speaking very well in that language, that genuinely shows investment to the degree in which
Mm-hmm.
you are now on the other side. You have passed the Rubicon, and as a result, you are more than accepted as a
Mm-hmm.
full member, I find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely true. Um, and talking about actually investment, um, I kind of wonder why and how you became a language teacher, because I um, feel like there is some like I could tell that you probably push your students, that they can do it, especially when it comes to, because I just wonder where people get motivation to speak a certain language. And so speaking a language and helping others speak other languages, I just wonder how it all became, like your world in a way.
Well, the short answer is that it started as a hustle for money when I was a graduate student
Okay.
at Columbia University. So that's the short answer. But in part, I've always really dreamed of being a teacher. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason why is because I really wanted to spare other people from confusion. I
Mm-hmm.
moved, so I was born in Boston. I moved to Virginia when I was a small kid, Maryland when I was a slightly bigger kid, and Connecticut when I was an even bigger kid. And so as a
Mm-hmm.
result, that involved a lot of changing schools, that did involve a lot of starting things from the ground up. And in a sense, there was just like being thrown into a swimming pool without necessarily learning how to swim. And
Mm-hmm.
that is a whole world of confusion.
Mm-hmm.
And once I finally got it, usually through sink or swim methods, then it was so painful for me that I wanted to spare others that. And
Oh.
also, I know exactly what it is to genuinely live in a world where you're not always encountering encouragement to
Mm-hmm.
acquire your skills. And like there's a reason that a lot of my students that they sometimes intonate me with negative self-talk like, "Oh, I'm never going to learn how to do this."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just always there like offering that hand in order to pull them up.
Mm.
And that's the primary reason I became a teacher, to become that hand to pull them up. And also, another thing I do is that I really tend to offer bite sized solutions for the short term. At the
Mm-hmm.
end of all of my classes, I give them a little recipe of something that they should be doing before their next class.
Oh,
And
okay.
the closest thing to a one size fits all solution is listen to your target language for 30 minutes every day.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's a
so,
great
especially if
tip.
you're a beginner and trouble understanding things or
Mm-hmm.
pronouncing sounds, that will solve both of those issues.
Mm. That's great. That's a great tip. I'll use it when
Hmm.
you know, I'm really trying to learn some Chinese, so I'll definitely use it. Do you feel confused sometimes by the languages that you have in your head? So, or the other way around, maybe you switch between languages very easily, and they kind of you use it depending on the context, or do you think in these languages? How does it work for you?
Okay, so the way I see it, Agnieszka, is that it's sort of like a substance of my brain that I choose one of the vessels to take out and then express thoughts. And that,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense, that sometimes the vessels, they will have little tiny stains from each other on the other. And so
Okay.
one result of this is that sometimes I will use one idiom from one language in another. So, for like one
Mm-hmm.
example is a Swedish idiom meaning to have the millimeters on your side, and which means to have the advantage. Very much like many English idioms, this is a reference to sailing. And I do remember one time using like "I have the millimeters on my side" in an English conversation. I was like, and the person I was speaking to was a little bit confused.
Mm.
Um, and so things of this nature, and sometimes it can actually get particularly hilarious. Um, there's a well-known YouTuber, Mojo Lincoln, who is a Hungarian American, and at one point he refers to, I believe, a girl he's on a date with as using the Hungarian expression "good head," and that does not sound very nice in English. Although Yofei does work in Hungarian, and then she leaves him instantly.
Oh no! I thought it would be like a happy ending. Oh.
Well, I suppose you're welcome to write your own fan fiction version, but
Yeah, exactly. We
okay.
have to. We should. We really should.
Maybe we could get him on this podcast. I don't know. All right.
Exactly.
All right.
So I think we can, finish with that. Like, I think that I think there was so many lovely metaphors in our conversation.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for that. And I think we're just finishing with the fact that, languages are true magic. So thank you, Jared, for being here and for your time.
You're very welcome.
And yeah, so this was SciLang Global Podcast. Till the next time. Thank you.